Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Genre Equality Podcast. I'm Hitzer.
I'm Isa.
Yes, it's been a month since we've done our flagship show. We've done a bunch of Behold episodes since then. So if you haven't checked those out, please go over to our Facebook or our Mixcloud. Behold is our spin-off podcast where we talk about things other than genre, although genre is not excluded from there. But
Mm-hmm.
things that we don't talk about here, lah. But we're mad excited to be back for the flagship show because man, it's kind of been a dry couple of months, 3 or 4 months
Yeah.
because of COVID. I mean, not dry, like there's still titles coming out, but lesser than usual. But I think we're starting to get back into the groove of things. Cinemas are opening, movies are being released. So we have a pretty packed episode for you this month because we'll be talking about probably the biggest release of the month. It is Tenet, Christopher Nolan's new film,
Mm-hmm.
the final season of Agents of Shield. And lots of other big titles like Umbrella Academy we'll be talking about, Infinity Train, the new Transformers series, Tales of Arcadia is back, and lots more. Also be talking about. We'll be bringing back genre equality issues. Where
Yeah.
we talk about the issues facing the genre industry. In this case, I'll be talking about the massive layoffs going on over at DC Comics, and I will be talking about Japan's latest crackdown on anime and manga piracy. RIP, Kiss Anime and Kiss Manga. But first, let's talk about a real person who passed away. Breaking news of the day that we are recording today. Actually, just this morning, we found out that King T'Challa himself, Black Panther, Chadwick Boseman, has passed away due to colon cancer. Do
Mm-hmm.
you have any thoughts about this?
Oh man, I woke up to the news and I was pretty shocked because I had no idea he was suffering from cancer.
Apparently, he kept it quite under wraps. Huh?
Yeah, so just going through like the stories and all the tributes that were going on and just like some of the things that the family was sharing, like it's pretty insane to think that over the last 4 years he's been battling colon cancer while at the same time like producing the kind of work that he's been doing, which is
Mm.
kind of insane.
Yeah, he was diagnosed the year that Black Panther came out. So everything he's done since then, he's been doing in the middle of chemotherapy, surgeries, films like The Five Bloods, and tons of others that he's been doing
Mm-hmm.
while dealing with colon cancer and keeping it under wraps.
Yeah,
And it's kind of no wonder in recent interviews he's looked a bit thinner, a bit
yeah,
frailer, But this is kind of the benefit of hindsight. Like none of us saw this coming. Nobody knew.
yeah, yeah. So it's very sad. Rest in peace, Chadwick.
Yeah. Interesting to note that he actually passed away on Jackie Robinson Day. If you don't know, he actually got his breakout role playing Jackie Robinson in
Yeah.
a film called 42. He Today is also at least the day of this recording, like the day he passed away, is also Jack Kirby's birthday, and Jack Kirby co-created Black Panther, so bit of kismet there, and he'll certainly be remembered alongside those greats as well, because his career actually hasn't been too long. He
Yeah.
started out at the age of in his mid 30s. Actually, he passed away at the age of 43. And his first big film role, his real breakout role, was in 2013. So it's been less than a decade, but what a career he's had in that short span of time, man.
Yeah, such great performances from him. I mean, like some of the titles that he did were definitely went under the radar, but
Mm.
every single one of them, stellar performances from Chadwick Boseman.
Yes, yes. If you only do know him as Black Panther, go check out 42 where he plays Jackie Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
Go check out the film where he plays Jackie Brown. Two real iconic biopics that they picked Chadwick Boseman to do. And of course, genre fans obviously know him as Black Panther. He was in no less than 4 films in a span of 2 years. Civil War, Black Panther, Infinity War, Endgame. All that he was filming as he was dealing with this. And most recently, The Five Bloods just came out.
Yeah.
The Spike Lee's new joint over at Netflix. To check it out. Great performance there for him as well. And actually, he has one more film coming out this year
Mhm.
that he managed to complete filming before he passed. It's called Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. So we do have more work to look out for him coming up, like, even though he has sadly passed away.
Yeah, looking forward
Y-
to watching that.
yeah, man. As Black Panther, he just exuded this kind of regality and a kind of like decency and grounded power that like people like Christopher Reeves had. And he'll be sorely missed. And I do wonder what's gonna happen with the Black Panther franchise going forward. Although that's not
Yeah.
important at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, like I think in the midst of the family grieving and all that, Marvel hasn't said anything yet, which is
Hmm.
which is wise of them. So we will see. I mean, like it really does seem as though, uh, going into what are we now, Phase 4.
Four, yeah.
Yeah, so going to Phase 4, Marvel has its own plans, and I we don't actually know if any of that has been derailed. We don't actually know if the exec studios were privy to the to his struggles,
Mm.
and all of that. So that will probably play out over the end of the year, I'm guessing.
That's true, yeah. So we'll do look out for that, lah. I'm not sure that it's going to be recasted, or maybe like someone like Shuri will take over the role. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see what happens to that, lah. But for now, like R.I.P. Chadwick Boseman, he'll be sorely missed.
Indeed.
And anyways, let's move on to our regular show. First up is maybe not our favorite topic of the month, but it's certainly the most uh, it's certainly the biggest lah. I don't think that can be doubted.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, in the dearth of kind of material that we've had to work with over the last couple of months, I think it's one of the big names that
Hmm.
we were looking out for, kind of excited by. I mean, like whenever Nolan announces something,
Yep.
it's always going to get like a lot of hype, right? And for something to have taken as long as this has,
Hmm.
uh, it definitely garnered a fair bit of attention before its release.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Let's jump right into it. Christopher Nolan's Tenet is finally here, and as the one and only proper summer blockbuster to receive a theatrical rollout this year, it had extra expectations on its shoulders, a world of
mm,
expectations more so than
yep,
usual. So what is Tenet about? Well, in short, it's a large-scale espionage spy blockbuster that concerns a bunch of secret agents fighting for the survival of the world after the emergence of a technology that reverses the entropy of objects and people, therefore inverting time. If you want a more detailed explanation, I suggest you go watch the film because I don't want to spoil anything.
yeah.
But I doubt that you'll get any information from the film either because there is very little intellectual stimulation or just pure emotional joy from watching a big blockbuster of this scale, just due to the fact that I think it was poorly made and poorly edited, and overall an incomprehensible film.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have to agree with you here. Like, I think a lot of the time when you're going to dive into something with a sci-fi premise
Mm.
of this kind of complexity, because I mean, the premise is fairly complex, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you do need some sort of explication for the audience, especially if you want to reach, you want to have a broad reach to fans,
Yep.
and Tenet had none of that, right? And we'll go
Mm.
into the details a bit more without spoiling anything. Although to be fair, there's nothing to be spoiled,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So it's just been honestly, I walked out of the cinema thinking it was a fair bit of mess. One
Mm.
of the messiest time related stories that we've seen in a long while, I think.
Especially from Nolan, who has actually done very well with his very unique, high concept ideas.
Yeah.
Inception was a difficult concept to explain, Interstellar and stuff like that. But he's always done a really good job at kind of not dumbing it down, but breaking it down in a way that is digestible to an audience, lah.
Yeah, and I think like with stuff like Inception, like there was enough information for you to posit kind of your own ideas and interpretations and all of that, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
symbolism that's caught within that, the premise of the show itself, the very concept of diving into dreams and so on and so forth. Like all of that was still very well laid out in a
Mm.
way that was acceptable,
Yep.
right? Like you could stomach that, and for audiences who were more inclined to go and dig a little deeper or read a little further, there was opportunity for that. There's opportunity for discussion. It was thought provoking in its own way because it provided enough for
Mm.
audiences to work on.
Yep.
Tenet, on the other hand,
Mm.
is obscured, right, by the its own grandeur, right, or its own like delusion of grandeur,
Mm-hmm.
and that becomes a problem because like it's so esoteric in the way that it's presented. Like it's presenting you a puzzle that isn't a puzzle, right?
Mm.
Like there's nothing to it behind the spectacle of it, and that I think was very problematic for both yourself and me.
Oh, definitely, man. I think Christopher Nolan is indeed a master craftsman. But Tenet is the first film that kind of most nakedly exposes his inadequacies as a storyteller.
Yeah.
Similar to how I felt Westworld season 3 exposed his brother's exact same flaws, Jonathan Nolan.
Yes.
This movie is a big, dumb secret agent blockbuster, as was Inception, to be honest, that uses yet again a non-linear structural device, in this case reverse entropy, to trick you into thinking that its convoluted sci-fi narrative is cleverer than it really is.
Yeah.
And for all its visual spectacle, and it is spectacular, and for all its inventive set pieces, and it is very inventive, Tenet makes clear that Nolan hasn't the slightest inclination to tell human stories. There is no emotion or character arcs here,
Yeah.
just great actors wasted on mumbo jumbo, mumbly exposition,
Hmm.
serving as plot devices in service of an admittedly very cool gimmick. This is the most Christopher Nolan-y film I've ever seen. For better or for worse, he's most self-indulgent.
Yeah.
At the very least, other spy blockbusters like Mission Impossible or Jason Bourne or James Bond tries to give you characters to care about. The enormity of Tenet's scale and sequences is indeed a sight to behold, but there is little to hold your interest when its internal logic is not there,
Yeah.
and there are no characters that you can emotionally invest in, and that is through no fault of the actors. All of them did a great job, with Elizabeth Debicki in particular kind of single-handedly saving a disastrous third act with
Uh,
trying her best to emote what little Nolan has given her.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, it's all smoke and mirrors, isn't it? And quite literally mirrors in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
Just like how did they green like this?
Yeah.
It's kind of what I'm wondering, right? Like I had high hopes for it just because it's been a while. I mean, like based upon you know um Nolan's previous non-linear work, I thought, okay, I mean, he's done a pretty good job so far.
Mm-hmm.
More or less, let's see what this whole new big thing is going to be about, and I was sorely disappointed.
Definitely. I mean, is the spectacle entertaining? Yes, I would
Yeah,
say the spectacle is entertaining.
yeah,
Seeing the scale of it and the mind-boggling nature of its time inversion action is
yeah,
quite marvelous, in the way that it's set up. Like, I think it's logistically an amazing film,
yeah.
a well-crafted visually. And I truly loved Ludwig Göransson's muscular score,
Oh, so good.
which made me feel like I was at a Hexen Cloak concert at times. But it's terrible sound mixing, inaudible dialogue, paper thin characters, horrid pacing, and Nolan's penchant for using complex nonlinear trickery as a substitute for human drama
Yeah.
makes this, I think, a pass from me lah. What about you?
I mean, outside of the score, which was amazing, right?
Mm,
Like we were talking about it a bit after we walked out of the cinema.
yeah.
Um, I I think maybe like 30 minutes into it, I was just like, you know
Mm,
what? I'm just gonna pretend that this is a very messy, convoluted, stylistic music video,
yeah. Yeah.
and I'm just gonna go with that.
Mm-hmm.
It was just very annoying and frustrating to see kind of like the rules of the show being thrown at you, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
and not followed.
Mm,
And like even then, like Nolan's like usual attention to detail seemed to be lacking.
yep.
In all of the kind of like the ways in which like this particular world that he has created operates and all of that, like there's usually more to go on,
Mm-hmm.
like details that you tend to notice that make you feel good, right? It's like, oh yeah, I kind of noticed that, and that kind of played out later on, but none of that
Mm,
really kind of ties. We didn't get any of that, like
mhm,
you are just so befuddled by what is going on for large portions of the movie that it
mm,
takes any sort of enjoyment out of it. It doesn't leave you, in awe. It doesn't leave you, with something to think about. It doesn't leave you like feeling anything just because it's a camera trick, right? Like over and
mm,
over again.
mhm.
And that can only be so entertaining for so long.
Definitely. I'm giving this a 4 out of 10. What about you?
I'm gonna give it a 5, just like a barely pass, because the score is amazing.
Okay.
And I think that I have a feeling someone out there is gonna try and recut the whole thing to make more sense.
Mm.
And I mean, kudos to them if they do try that.
It probably needs to be longer, right? Just to
Yeah, I
time
mean,
for characters to breathe and all of that.
that's true. I mean, like, we're not gonna get a Snyder cut for this for sure, but
Yep.
you know, I, at the same time, we also have to acknowledge the fact that this isn't the full story.
Yep.
But to start off a franchise like this is
Mm.
is kind of disastrous. I'm gonna give it a
100%
five
agree.
just because the
Okay.
score was really, really good and there is some spectacle to it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I'm not gonna recommend that, you spend, how long was the runtime? 2.5 hours?
2.5 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's 2.5 hours. If you have 2.5 hours and you want to feel like completely and utterly, confused,
Yep.
sure, go ahead, right?
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, I think it's not really worth catching. And if anything, you should go on Spotify or your favorite streaming music streaming service and go and check out the score because the score is amazing.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Next up, we'll be talking about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. One of our favorite live action superhero shows wraps up for its stellar run with its seventh and final season. So
Mm.
we're here to bid goodbye to the perennially underrated Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Oh yeah.
This climactic arc finds the crew traveling back to various 20th century time periods as they attempt to stop a synthetic alien race called the Chronicoms from altering history and erasing Shield. This gives the show a really great excuse to have fun with its format, its
Yep.
costuming, its music, its presentation, and all of that. I can tell that they had a blast doing this season. And kind of depending on the time period, the show can choose to present itself like a black and white 50s noir, or a 70s action series, or an 80s sci-fi and horror with the
Yep.
blood and the janky camera angles. And that kind of creative presentation is a highlight. Story-wise, it's also a good way to capitalize on Shield's own inbuilt history and mythology, like Hydra, the Lighthouse, Gideon Malik, Patton Oswalt's Agent Koenig, the Inhumans Afterlife, and more. And they're having a ball with the established MCU history too. Like pulling out threads like Project Insight from Winter Soldier, and Agent Daniel Sousa from the Agent Carter series, who becomes a surprisingly important member to the team this season.
Yeah.
In fact, I actually thought like Sousa was one of the best parts of season seven, and he did a lot to freshen up a familiar team dynamic.
Yeah.
As a big fan of Agent Carter, I adored how the Shield writer stayed true to his character's essence.
Hmm.
He's this unflappable, intelligent, and easily the best spy in Shield because unlike the rest of this modern team, he's
Yeah.
actually a trained espionage agent. It's demonstrated over and over again just how much better he is at the nuances of spy work. The way he reacted or didn't react to when he learned that Gemma wasn't Peggy is a prime example of this. It was so subtle but effective in conveying that this guy may be disabled and have no powers, but he's a damn good spy.
Yeah.
Even his romance with Daisy kind of makes sense if you kind of consider it's just his transference from an unrequited crush on Peggy. So yeah, what do you think about the final season of Agents of Shield?
Oh man, Ages for this final season was so fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it felt a lot like, I mean, outside of the whole time traveling shtick, it was Ages meets Legends, right?
Yep.
Both shows that we love equally. I think there were also some very, very obvious kind of like parallels between some of the episodes we got in Ages this season and some of the episodes we got in Legends of seasons past.
Yep.
And I think like reliving some of those, the retelling of some of those moments in the Agents universe was very different and very fresh, but no less funny.
Yeah.
It's a little sad to say goodbye to the series, but understandably so. I think like Marvel TV has this is the last show, right? Basically, now that they've wrapped
From
up.
Yeah, well, it's the last show for Marvel's TV division, which has now been
Yep.
folded into MCU in general. So there will be additional Marvel set TV shows, but
Yep.
they won't be under this company, lah, under the studio.
Yeah. So this Agents of Shield season 7 is kind of the last one, and then after that we're gonna go move into all the stuff that you're gonna get on Disney, right?
Yep.
Basically, so it was fun. It was a nice kind of very nice, satisfying goodbye to the characters. I
Mm-hmm.
especially like how they wrapped everything up. It didn't leave us hanging with anything. Everybody's kind of like story arcs and character arcs were wrapped up very nicely by the end.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very happy with that. And it's hard to do that. I feel like in this day and age with so many like big franchises,
Mm-hmm.
uh, failing to do so. Anywhere from your Game of Thrones and all of that. Like we've seen so many of them fail at the end.
Yep.
But for agents to come and give us one more season that we didn't know we were gonna have, right?
Yep.
And for them to have told the stories that needed to be told
Mm-hmm.
while going through a fairly not complicated, but a fairly complex storyline as
Hmm.
everything as all our characters are going through. I feel like they did a great job with that.
Hmm.
And overall, I was just very content with the way that it ended, which is a far cry from a lot of other big franchises that we've been disappointed by.
Yeah, I agree. It's always nice to see Clark Gregg reprise his role as the ever charming Phil Coulson, albeit an LMD version this time. It's a very exciting and emotional season, a solid way to cap off Agents of Shield, which I
Definitely.
think it's Marvel's greatest ever series to date. I think it surpasses Daredevil and Punisher and all of that.
Hmm.
Perhaps on the slight downside is perhaps not as consistently great as Peak Shield, which is seasons three,
Oh,
four, five.
yeah, for sure.
But it's still pretty darn good. Nevertheless, the season did manage to deliver one of the series' all-time best episodes during the time loop episode in episode 9.
Yeah.
It's a rite of passage for every sci-fi show to do a time loop episode, and I'm honestly shocked that this hasn't happened before now. That it took Shield this long to do a time loop episode, and the one that they did was a banger.
Yeah.
It was clever, it was propulsive, it was heavy on emotion, especially with Enoch's heartbreaking sacrifice,
Yeah.
his existential and emotional crisis before his death, talking about mortality and loneliness and
Loneliness,
the
yeah.
loved ones he left behind. It was so beautiful and so profoundly human. It was the one episode this season that made me laugh and cry and excited in equal measure. It was peak Shield.
Mm.
But overall, yeah, you're right. The time travel superhero team gimmick does at times feel like a more straight-laced Legends of Tomorrow or
Yeah.
Doctor Who.
Yeah.
It's a very minor nitpick. Another small nitpick is I didn't find the villains very compelling.
Oh, yes.
Um, Especially the new Nathaniel Malik, the
Uh,
young John Garrett, just very weak source villains with weak actors. And I really can't begin to express how disappointed I was by the lack of fits this season. He did come in for the finale, but it wasn't enough fits for me.
yeah.
But I think overall, in true Shield fashion, season 7 came together in the end to
Yeah.
deliver an action-packed, emotionally satisfying finale that tied all the pieces together.
Mm.
What do you think? Like, do you agree that the villains were weak and
Yeah, I think Nathaniel Malik was just uh, I mean, like, how caricature. This is
mm,
might be the most caricature villain that we've ever gotten from Shield.
yeah,
From
yeah,
Agents. I mean, like, with like highlights like Grant Ward, right?
yep,
Like, multiple times over multiple characters, to
mm-hmm,
have that kind of depth to it. This was very disappointing. I feel like Daniel Malik wasn't a great villain.
mm.
Even like bringing in Cora for the flip as well, like that didn't feel very satisfying either.
Yeah. Cora
Uh,
wasn't a good actress. I don't know who she was, but I didn't click for me.
yeah, yeah, she didn't click either, and none of that felt weighty enough to give any sort of direness to their situation. Like, they're fighting time at the end of the day, sure.
Yeah,
But even like, Sybil, oh, I can't remember the actress's name.
yeah,
Yeah, like, great actress, didn't quite nail it for me either. Like, the Comic Cons didn't feel as threatening as I felt that they should have been.
mm-hmm,
And because of that, like, it just felt like they were kind of waddling their way through
yeah,
because of the lack of antagonism from the villain camp.
mm,
Um, yeah, so that generally was my biggest complaint.
yep,
It didn't allow us to have any sort of weight to kind of like the final climatic showdown between
uh huh,
Daisy and Nathaniel Malik. I mean,
yep,
like, I think those were missed opportunities, but at the same time, I think from the very first episode, you kind of understood that they are going to one track this, right? Like,
yeah,
they've got a story that they need to tell, and they need to wrap up all of these things, and there isn't time to go and kind of like get all the rest of the things done, which is a
y-
little sad.
yeah.
um but yeah, pretty
Yeah,
much.
I think the guy in particular, the young guy who plays young John Garrett, Bill Paxton, the late great Bill Paxton, rolling his grave over that caricature that he tried to do. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness! But in the end, I still think that Shield pulled together at the end. And it actually ended up being much neater, time travel wise, than Legends or Doctor Who is.
Oh yeah, for
Because
sure.
they transverse the multiverse through the quantum realm again, bringing aspects of the other MCU into it. It was very clever.
Yep.
Of course it does have plot holes, of course, but like you're willing to overlook things, when you're invested in character, and
Hmm.
this is something that Agents of Shield does that Tenet doesn't. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm willing to give this a pass lah.
Yep.
How would you rate the final season of Agents of Shield?
Ooh, I really enjoyed it overall. I'm going to give it a 7.5.
Yep.
It's
Yeah.
not peak Shield for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, like more than happy with the way that they decided to end things.
Same, yeah. I'm giving this a seven. We both really like the season. Not peak Shield, but even not peak Shield is still very good. In fact, I actually think that season four of Agents of Shield, the peakest of Shield, with framework and Ghost Rider and all thing, it is the favorite thing for me lah. My favorite MCU thing that's ever
Mm,
happened. Like a hit of Winter Soldier and Iron Man and Infinity War and Endgame even.
yep,
That was my favorite thing the MCU has ever produced, and
absolutely.
Agents of Shield gave that to me. So I'm really gonna miss the show. It's a great series. I mean, when it was serious, it was serious. When it was funny, it was funny.
Hmm.
A really good live action show. 7 out of 10. Any concluding thoughts before we move on about
Uh,
Agents of Shield?
I'm gonna miss it. I don't know if we are ever gonna get something of that ilk to fill that gap from
Mm.
Disney.
I think
Uh,
WandaVision might be really great.
yeah, I mean, fingers crossed. I'm looking forward to that, but we don't know yet, and we'll really have to kind of see how the TV shows do under the kind of like the new kind of supervision and all of that.
Mm.
So I hope that something eventually fills the gap that Agents is going to leave.
Mm.
But I'm sorry to see the show go. I am.
Yeah, man.
But at the same time, I totally understand that it's time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Next up, moving on. We're talking about Infinity Train next. Did you watch the first two seasons? Because I remember reviewing it alone in previous episodes.
Yeah, so I caught up with the first two seasons in
Mm-hmm.
order to review season three as well.
Oh, nice. Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I thought you had been watching along the way as well.
Uh, I was watching along for season two, right? The one
Yeah.
with MT.
Yep.
Yeah. So I had to catch up season one and season two at the same time, and then when season
Mm.
three came out, but that wasn't too long ago actually. I think it was just a couple of months back.
Season two was January this year.
Yeah. So in January, I caught up with the whole of season one because I missed out on that when you were
Mm-hmm.
reviewing it earlier.
Yep.
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 So I'm all caught up now. Well, short of two episodes actually.
Definitely,
Uh,
you've seen the majority of season three, so we're
yeah.
gonna dive into Infinity Train book three slash season three. So the basic premise of this Cartoon Network show, which is now on HBO Max, actually, it's kind of an animated anthology. That is kind of deceptively simple.
Mm-hmm.
Kids struggling with issues in their lives find themselves whisked away by a magical, endlessly sprawling locomotive, where a series of strangely themed train cars help them deal with the aforementioned interpersonal problems. Journeying with an infinite universe's array of the goofball robots and talking animal companions. The kids relearn how to open up and stand up for the people they care about, and accept that they can't control everything in their lives. And in the end, they pass an emotional milestone, come to terms with their own inner demons, and often through some actually highly dangerous monsters, they finally get to go home.
Yep.
And those two seasons, through the two seasons, it's been a very creative, exceedingly emotional ride.
Mm-hmm.
But season three explores what happens when someone doesn't want to or isn't able to perform that kind of growth, that
Yep.
personal growth. What happens when to someone trapped in a reality designed to help them become a better person, but they're so invested in their own misery that they find themselves incapable of change.
Mm-hmm.
That's the essential premise of it. What do you think about season three?
I okay. I enjoy the fact that every season so far has been different, but has led on from the previous season,
Mm-hmm.
right? For this season, we follow
The Apex.
the Apex, right? So Grace and Simon, who we met in season two,
Mm-hmm.
because they had a showdown with MT.
Yep.
And I've enjoyed that. Like, I think this sort of like tangential storylines with different kind of characters really help to flesh out the world in a very different way,
Mm-hmm.
to give us like different perspectives. I am surprised at just how much character work you can squeeze into 10 short episodes, right?
Mm.
And I felt that even more so for season three,
Yep.
just because like our protagonists this time around, there are two of them, and maybe just because of the sheer volume of the things that they kind of have to work through, the issues that they have to work through individually and
Mm-hmm.
together, that like it feels fairly meaty for something that has a very short runtime. Um,
Mm.
I do think that this season feels a lot darker.
Mm,
Than definitely darker than season one and slightly darker than season two.
yeah.
I do feel like because our protagonists this time round are older,
Mm,
than both Tulip and MT.
yeah.
I also think like the issues that they have to tackle have a slightly more mature tone to it,
Mm-hmm.
than we did get in the previous two seasons. And although the tone is more mature, the issues are pretty similar,
Yeah.
right? In terms of thematically, at least.
Mm.
So I overall I did enjoy it. I'm looking forward to finishing up the series to just see where this goes.
Yeah,
Uh,
the season three it delves deeper, as you mentioned, into the origins and philosophy of the Apex, which is a group originally encountered back in the second season. Many of the kids who've rejected the train's overall message, they're driven by two beliefs, that the creatures encountered in the train's various cars, who they dub as nulls, aren't real people and thus can be dealt with as one pleases. And secondly, that the only goal is in your life is to get your number up, i.e., the train's countdown to personal epiphany tattooed on every passenger's arm. They're trying to get their number up as high as possible rather than
yep.
down. Often by breaking or killing any nulls that they get their hands on. These like highly destructive lost boys and girls spend their days hanging out in a trash shopping mall, or at least a train car that looks like one, and launching raids on other cars under the guidance of their leaders, who is, I can only describe him as a future proud boy and utter piece of shit, Simon, and a charismatic manipulator named Grace. And you're right. This is one of the darkest and most challenging seasons of Infinity Train so
Yeah,
far,
absolutely.
which is in line with Infinity Train's kind of emotional scope. Like every season, it gets darker and darker. The train itself is just as cheerfully odd and bright as ever, filled with talking rocks and absurdist side gags. But Simon and Grace, who are separated from their tribe early on, are forced to journey back to the group's base through a number of fantastical cars.
Yep.
They are deeply jaded teens, marked by their own unresolved issues, and by years spent in a world tailor made to try to force them to play by its benevolent but oppressive rules. Rather than engage the train, they've learned that it's easier and faster to smash through obstacles, regardless of the long term harm that approach might cause. Even when the requisite dose of cuteness does arrive in the form of a quote unquote 6-year-old passenger Hazel and her gorilla companion slash musical instrument tuba, neither Grace nor Simon initially view them as with anything but a mixture of opportunity and mistrust.
Yep.
It's to Infinity Train's credit that each of the seasons has gotten more complex in its storytelling and in the emotional issues they seek to address. The first book centered on a fairly straightforward story of a young girl learning a mixture of self-acceptance and self-responsibility, while the second Trojan Horse a more complex tale about identity inside a fairly upfront redemption plot.
Yep.
But book three is the most extreme and ambitious thing that Owen Dennis, the creator, and his crew have ventured to date, asking audiences to spend a lot of time with protagonists who have done some very real harm to others. Something happens in episode 5
Yep.
that is almost irredeemable. And in doing so, the show asks pointed questions about where those dangerous impulses come from and what can be done in their aftermath. How children who have been hurt and misguided in their formative years can grow up to be so toxic, abusive, and destructive. And through its layers of brightly colored allegorical cover, it speaks on topics about abuse, trauma, racism, grief,
Hmm.
tribalism, and more, with a forthright emotionality that refuses to flinch from the heaviness of the things that it's asking its viewers to grapple with.
Yep.
It's a show about learning to see others as people, and when in a moment of climax, one character blindly demands of another, why would I ever want to change when I'm always right? It feels like such a gut punch, and
Hmm.
all that to say, you still get Kate Mulgrew playing a purring, condescendingly sly cat, to say nothing of the wonders of the debutante ball or the mysteries of the Heiho Wo car. The imagination that powers the series and every single car can have its own, they have their own internal rules and themes.
Yep.
The whimsicalness is still going strong, so it's striking a tricky balance. To keep a show that is this silly while also tackling the feelings of its character in such perfect focus. I actually think that Infinity Train season 3 is the best it's seen to date.
Yep.
And prior to seeing episode 9 and 10, I was gonna rate it a 9, because Infinity Train season 1 and 2 I rated a 9 out of 10.
Hmm.
But upon seeing the finale, I'm upping my rating to a 10 out of 10.
Damn. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm kind of missing out. at the
Mm.
moment. Okay, so just based upon what I've seen, given that I haven't done the penultimate and the last episode,
Yep.
I'm gonna give it a 7.5,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. I just think that Infinity Train has shaped up to be like one of the forerunners in terms of like pushing what animation is doing right now in
Mm.
terms of storytelling, right? And we keep on going on and on again. We are having a renaissance right now of
Mm.
just the kind of stories that are coming out from the animated world. And I think Infinity Train is definitely up there with the greats at the moment. And season 3 is a very good indication of why,
Mm.
just to be able, like you said, just to be able to kind of balance, right, this very silly world with very nuanced and very complex and complicated and messy characters is
Mm-hmm.
hard to do, and I hope they'll be able to kind of keep them up into the seasons from here on. And
Yeah, sadly, actually, Infinity Train is kind of on the verge of cancellation at HBO Max, just because it doesn't receive the ratings that it should lah. Because
yeah.
it's such a great show, the ratings are down. Its ratings has kept steady from Cartoon Network, but the HBO Max. If you don't know, like Warner Media is this big new corporate entity that's bought over everything: HBO, Cartoon Network, etc. So they're in a cost cutting phase at the moment, and I'll talk about that with regards to DC Comics at the end
Yeah,
lah.
for sure.
But Infinity Train is one of the shows on the bubble, and I really hope they don't cancel it because I would love to see more of the world like that they're building.
Yeah, I do feel, however, that like something like Infinity Train could possibly do well on their own if they find the right kind of platform or backing.
Mm-hmm.
It did feel very strange, hearing about that they're going to move it to HBO Max, because like, why is it playing on HBO Max? Like, who's the demographic on HBO Max that you're going to reach out to? Whereas
Yep.
it makes total sense on Cartoon Network, right?
Yep.
So I'm hoping that they don't get cancelled, and I'm hoping that even if HBO Max drops them, that it's worth backing them.
It can go
Who?
back to Cartoon Network lah, at least.
Yeah, I hope so. I really, really
Yeah.
hope so, because it makes so much more sense there.
Yep. Yep. I mean, HBO Max is hidden behind a paywall, which is why the ratings are kind of dropped this year. So what you gonna do? And plus, it's actually HBO Max is actually not available in many countries,
Mm-hmm.
so that's another issue. Anyways, yeah, we loved Infinity Train. Hope you catch it as well. Next up, we're moving on to the Umbrella Academy season 2. As many of you may know, Gerard Way's weird and wonderful Umbrella Academy comic was a direct homage to Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol. And if you listen to my first review, my review of the first season, you know that I wasn't as enthralled with this show as
Mm,
most were. It was a very hyped, very buzzy show.
yeah.
At least according to my social media, lah. It seems like all my friends loved it. I liked it, but didn't love it, lah. But while it was indeed inventive and eccentric and imaginative, its burst of brilliance were dragged down by spotty storytelling, murky character work, and a hesitation to lean full on into the absurdities of the Umbrella Academy.
Yep.
So in short, it felt like the Coke Zero basic bitch version of the Doom Patrol show, which I'll talk about later. But boy, I think it became blazingly clear from the start of season 2 that any issues with the first season have kind of been addressed and improved.
Yep.
And it's nice to see that the Umbrella Academy creative team kind of listen to the critiques, like really listen to the critiques,
Hmm.
and strive to make a second season with a tighter story, cleaner execution, stronger performances, and better world building. So I was impressed that they they address the problems. It's not completely fixed, but they're
Yeah.
on their way to fixing it at least.
Hmm.
Yeah, what do you think about season 2?
I definitely enjoyed season 2 a lot more. It felt like a completely different show.
Yeah.
Like just with really basic things like the pacing, right? Like fixing the pacing, that's such a huge deal. I do
Mm,
feel like the character work, while a lot better there around, still could use a bit more, right? Because
mm,
we are so focused on just like this very small cast, well, kind of small cast, ensemble of actors,
mm,
and I feel like um just not being afraid to step out on a limb
mhm.
made it so much more enjoyable, right?
Yeah.
And that to me was like the bulk of my how entertained I was by season 2 as compared to season 1. I very honestly, just going on how season 1 was, I wanted to give it a miss,
Yep.
really honestly, but I'm glad I didn't, because there are shows like this one who have been
Mhm.
redeemed from better second seasons, even Agents, right, for that matter.
Yeah. Definitely. Yes.
Right. So I'm glad I gave it a chance. On the whole, I do feel that it was a lot tighter. I do
Yeah.
feel that there was just a lot more present
Mhm.
than a lot of kind of like shuffling about that they had in the first season as well.
Mm.
So yeah, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would.
Same, yeah.
And I'm hoping they keep this pace up because like it's promising now, you know. And I think
Hmm.
they've managed in season 2 to kind of differentiate themselves from Doom Patrol, or rather, like Doom Patrol has gone from kind of strength to strength, and
Mm.
now Umbrella Academy knows like their what path they have to throw out to not, you know, get that kind of comparison again.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've realized that it's okay to lead into the weirder aspects of the show. You know, it doesn't have to be serious prestige drama all the time.
Yeah.
And everyone on the cast gets good arcs this season. I think
Mm.
the highlight is Allison and her arc, where she confronts what it means to be black in Dallas in the early '60s.
Yep.
Allison landing alone in the world where the first establishment she walks into for help is a whites only diner. It's kind of an ominous portent of what awaits her. She eventually grows to become a black civil rights organizer in the South, providing a path for Allison to explore what it means to be a hero and how heroism doesn't require superpowers.
Yeah.
The depiction of the consequences and bravery it takes to be a black activist in the '60s is well done, you know. And where I was mildly entertained by season one, now I feel like Umbrella Academy is crackling with energy, and
Mm.
it made me fully invested right from the beginning with an incredible action sequence, amazing action sequence, blew my mind, you know. And fans returning for season two will be rewarded with a world expanded in a variety of mind-blowing ways. Character explorations are richer and more thoughtful. The story is fast and thrilling and emotional. We are treated into deeper dives into the more surreal aspects of the world, like Ben's ghost existence, or the inner workings of the timeline preservation agency known as the Commission. Those dives paired alongside more grounded looks at how these once disparate superpowered siblings come together to use their powers to help others other than themselves makes Umbrella Academy feel like entirely new show, as you mentioned.
Mhm.
And it feels like the show that we've kind of deserved all along. You know, this is the show that it should have been in season one.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So we'll see. I hope they continue to do this. I'm so glad that they. It really does feel like they tried to address like point for point all the criticisms that they had in season one, and I really appreciate that. You
Yeah.
know, because like look at where it's come. You know.
Yeah. How would you rate season two?
I'm gonna give it 6.5 out of 10 for me. I do feel like there are still certain things that they could work on for sure.
Yeah.
I think in terms of there's something that isn't quite complete about the world building. I understand that they're trying to pace it out and all of that. And I also understand that, you know, based upon like the original comic, there isn't much to go by,
Mm.
for that matter. So it I do feel like it needs to be a bit more robust, but I'm happier with just the pacing and much more meaty character work this time around.
Yeah, it also ends on a really great cliffhanger,
Yep.
which I won't spoil, but the cliffhanger at the end there, it takes the comics hasn't dived into that yet.
Yep.
Umbrella Academy Comics has been on hiatus, so whatever story they come out with season three will be their own. So that will be interesting to see lah.
Mhm.
And if you don't know, season two is actually based on volume two of Umbrella Academy called Dallas, where they travel back to 1960s Dallas and get involved in the JFK assassination and trying to stop or at least stop something that they created due to their time travel,
Yeah.
nuclear annihilation because of the Cold War. It's an interesting story and definitely a treat. I give it a 7 out of 10, whereas season one was a 5.5 out of me. So improvement for both of us.
Yep.
Yep. Next up, we'll be talking about the first part of the Transformers War for Cybertron trilogy. It's called Siege. The war between the Autobots and the Decepticons at this point is legendary. And over the years, fans have seen it from many different angles. And despite the previous iterations, Netflix, Rooster Teeth, and Hasbro have found a way to showcase and explore this familiar war with a more mature flair
Yeah.
in Siege, the first chapter of the trilogy. Um, Siege captures your attention with, I think, conflicted characters and surprising twists. And while I'm not a fan of Rooster Teeth's animation style,
Yeah.
which can feel stilted or sluggish at times, which it kind of does detract from the series, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
But I do enjoy the more mature take on the character building because I've never seen the Autobots and Decepticons as actual people before,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and which is what the show does well. What do you think about it?
Oh man. Okay. I'm not a big fan of Rooster Teeth animation, and I've never been. Even with our WBY as well, right? Like, which is what
Yeah,
they're kind of well known for.
the biggest one they have left.
Um,
Yeah,
I'll be very honest. It threw me off. Right.
yeah.
The first two episodes really, really threw me off. I found it very difficult to get immersed into it.
Mm,
Just because the animation, for one, right? Like the sluggishness of the animation, and I think in comparison to all the other Transformer stuff that we've gotten over the years, whether it's the Michael Bay one or a slew of like animated stuff that we've gotten in the last couple of years, it really was a bit unnerving, because you
mm,
always expect it to be a bit more snappy, to be a bit more fast paced, even frantic sometimes, I think.
yeah,
And to have the animation slow it down, and then to have the character dialogue and like just scenery chewing come in
yeah,
as well at the same time was really hard for me for the
yeah,
first two episodes.
yeah.
I think what really turned it around for me was while I just had it on, and after a while I kind of just lost interest in what was going on screen. So I was busying myself with doing something, and listening to the dialogue on its own, however,
Mm,
really changed that for me. I think the voice acting work here is really, really very good. There is a gravitas to the main characters. I think whoever's voicing Optimus Prime and Megatron, like
yeah.
so much great like subtlety in their voice that you can only really kind of focus on uh if you're not being distracted by the animation, I feel.
Right, right. Yeah.
And that kind of like turned it around for me, so I did end up finishing, I did end up enjoying it, just because
Mm,
it is so vastly different from anything that we've gotten out of the Transformers franchise, right? Like
agreed. Yeah.
just kind of preponderance on what is war and who is us, and the
Mm,
fact that both camps are rallying to the same cry but with very kind of different intentions and means of going about it,
yeah.
and just very valid
Mm,
questions philosophically that
and politically too.
and
Yeah.
politically as well, that
Yeah.
I never would have dreamed that would come from a Transformers.
Such a silly franchise, you
Yeah, such
know.
a silly franchise, right? Like
Yeah.
to flesh it out to this degree is insane to me.
Yep.
And it is absurd in at the same time, I it has become a treatise on war and identity,
Yeah.
and otherness,
Mm-hmm.
and class conflict, that it's mind-blowing how deep they went in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
uh
Yeah. Yeah.
I do feel that it leaned a bit too much in that direction. Like at the end of the day, it is supposed to be an action type
Mm,
thing. I don't think we got nearly enough of that.
mm,
And again, like Rooster Teeth's animation really doesn't feel very good when it comes
yep.
to the combat scenes. Like
Yeah.
I feel like when you're talking about something like war, and with a universe like the Transformers universe, like you need to be able to kind of show that kind of scale
Mm-hmm.
as well, which I feel was sorely lacking. A lot of the
Mm,
battles felt very small and very inconsequential to the monologuing of the main characters, right?
yep. Yep.
And that to me, like it was a little disjointed,
Mm.
more than I would have liked it to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think yes, I think fans might be surprised with the added depth that these characters, there's a kind of a harder edge to the world overall. The stakes feel high because you're unsure who will make it and who won't, and that's a level of unpredictability that previous iterations haven't always had.
Yeah.
The series' decision to kind of focus in on a handful of Transformers allows them to get the most of them, especially with characters like Jetfire, Wheeljack, Mirage, and a particular Decepticon that I won't spoil because he is at the center of a rewarding character arc.
Yeah, very.
And Siege kind of takes a classic premise and brings it to life in a very different way, all while setting the stage for I'm assuming it's going to be an epic story yet to come.
Yeah.
This is kind of the first act of the story, like it's part of a trilogy, you know. Yeah, I wasn't impressed with it visually, especially when I couldn't tell who was who during battle sequences and sluggish and all of that. But I did appreciate seeing my fan favorite characters being given layers of depth.
Mm.
In what felt like an unpredictable manner. So yeah, because of that, I liked the show more than I disliked it.
Yep.
And for fans who are unfamiliar with Transformers, this is actually a good opportunity to get to know these characters on the ground floor.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm rating this a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, it's a 6 out of 10 for me as well. I think like if if you're just generally a fan and you're willing to close certain eyes about things, the world building that takes place in this series is quite expansive. I think more than we've ever gotten when we're talking
Mhm.
about like Cybertron and what the systems in place were and all of that. Like it doesn't
Yep.
answer all your questions, but it's a lot more than we've gotten before.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that that will tickle the more serious fans and give you something to chew about, right? Like
Mhm.
it has so much more gravitas
Mm.
than any other Transformer thing that we've ever gotten.
Ever, yeah, definitely. Next on, we are actually moving to another animated show. It's a very animation heavy episode this month. We're talking about Tales of Arcadia Wizards. Guillermo del Toro's fantastic Tales of Arcadia trilogy continues after 3 seasons of Troll Hunters and 2 seasons of Tree Below, with a new series entitled Wizards. Now, if you're new to the whole Tales of Arcadia world, then for the love of God, do not jump in with Wizards. Most of the story is based on at least a passing understanding of what came before,
Yeah.
with a lot of ties to Troll Hunters and some minor connections to Tree Below. Now, with that disclaimer out of the way, Wizard follows a wizard in training named Duxi and the heroes of Arcadia, both humans, magical creatures, and aliens alike, as they embark on a time bending magical adventure back to old Camelot. Without giving any spoilers, I can say that we've met Duxi before in previous shows.
Yeah.
He's a barista in modern day Arcadia, but he's been an apprentice of Merlin's since the Middle Ages. And Duxi's sidekick is a flying cat named Archie, voiced by Alfred Molina. Duxi is still trying to prove himself to the immortal wizard as our heroes ascend back to the 12th century Camelot, where they become embroiled in a humans versus magical creatures war, while trying not to screw up the timeline. There's a lot of that going on in this episode. Uh, Safe to say that almost all the characters from Troll Hunters are reunited in the past, including an injured Jim, a powerful Claire, Toby, who's battled along, and they all battle alongside and occasionally against characters we've met from previous entries in the
Yep.
franchise.
Yep.
Including Merlin, Morgana, and Gunmar. Part of the fun of Wizards is reconnecting with old friends. The last Troll Hunters episode aired in 2018, so it's been a while, and characters that you thought you had lost. While seeing the origins of some characters that you never got to see, since their history was so far back in the past.
Yeah.
Arc is a highlight, and it's also interesting to see that perhaps Morgana was a misunderstood magical freedom fighter that
Yep.
King Arthur's that was kind of fighting against King Arthur's bigotry against magical creatures. Maybe his bigotry bears the bigger brunt of the blame for instigating the war than we thought.
Yep.
The new setting and the emphasis on past characters allows us a new insight into the creation of the amulet that grants the powers of the troll hunter, and we get to see a new young female troll take on the title of the troll hunter, at least in the past,
The
and
first Troll Hunter. Yeah.
it's voiced by Stephanie Beatrice, so that's great too. And I think plus Del Toro and collaborators have added some new elements to the mix to keep everything fresh. There's a race of evil forest-dwelling sorceresses that serve as a powerful new enemy that have surprising connections of characters, and when the action shifts back to modern day Arcadia for the last few episodes, catching up with at least one of our Tree Below favorites, even more secrets are revealed. It's a fun show,
Hmm.
and it's we've always liked the show, lah, but I do have some complaints about this season.
Yeah.
But before I get into that, what do you think about Wizards?
I was looking forward to this, right? Like, I think they definitely delivered for Troll Hunter and for Tree Below,
Mm,
with some fairly good like storylines and story arcs that kind of meshed together really well in hindsight. So I was curious to see how Wizards would go. I think I didn't necessarily enjoy the whole time travel thing again.
mm.
Maybe it's just because a fair bit of time
Fatigue.
traveling. Yeah, it's a fatigue kind of thing.
Yeah.
As well. I do like seeing the origins of some of the characters that we've seen before. I think especially Morgana's arc was eye opening, right? Like
Mm.
she's kind of like a 2-bit villain in prior to
Se-
this.
Season 2 of Troll Hunters. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, so to be able to see like the origin of that, and you is a much more sympathetic look at the character, right? A lot more human.
Mm.
Uh and that surprised me. And I wanted, as much as I enjoyed those bits, overall Wizards felt a tad underwhelming in comparison to everything else that we've gotten.
Yep.
And I'm not really sure if it's about just like Duxie isn't a great uh protagonist. I don't
Yeah.
think he was as compelling
As
as
Jim.
Jim, or
Mm.
even the Royal Twins. Like,
Yep.
there wasn't really much out of him. Like, I feel a lot of the time, like, Claire tended to dominate um the series when she was present. Her
Mm.
arc was much stronger, I think, as a budding kind of wizard-esque player herself,
Yeah.
as opposed to anybody else. And of course, like, whenever Jim is around, like, that it's going to focus around Jim, right? Like, at the end of the day, the MacGuffin is Jim.
Yeah.
And
Jim
that,
is the Captain America of the story. He's the guy lah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel like it did a bit of a disservice to everybody else, right?
Yeah.
Framing it in that way.
Yep.
Merlin being as smug as ever was is still kind of
Mm-hmm.
and to the team's detriment, I think, several times. So, like, in terms of revisiting characters and kind of reuniting them, sure, all of that was fun. I think some of the combat sequences were pretty fantastic, I
Yeah, I
have to
think the
admit.
animation has dramatically improved
Mm,
since the early days of Troll Hunters because
yeah,
I assume technology has gone further lah.
yeah, it felt a lot more dynamic. A lot
Yep.
of fight scenes were very dynamic. They were very, very flashy,
Mm.
and I definitely enjoyed all of that. Um, but I just think the main through line for this season of Wizards wasn't quite strong enough for my liking.
Yes, yeah, same. Because unlike other Troll Hunters or Three Below seasons, there's only 10 episodes of Wizards,
Yep.
which occasionally gives it a very super condensed, very hurried feeling. Some of the stories and arcs and emotional beats aren't given the room to breathe,
Yep.
and they can feel rushed, which is a flaw. And the tie-ins to Three Below feel random and perfunctory.
Hmm.
And at first, Wizards was promised as the ultimate culmination of the Tales of Arcadia trilogy, so when we at the end were left with a cliffhanger, unresolved arcs, and lingering questions, yeah, I was even more disappointed. Thankfully, though, it turns out Netflix has announced that the proper conclusion to Tales of Arcadia will come in the form of a full-length movie coming out next year
Hmm.
called Rise of the Titans. The creators are saying that it will be the Avengers Endgame of Tales of Arcadia, and I'm pretty psyched about that, bringing back every character from every show. Nevertheless, the lack of resolution in Wizards and its hurried pace makes it, I feel, the weakest entry of the Arcadia franchise,
Yep.
but it's still pretty good.
Yeah, it's still pretty good. Okay, I think my issue with it is that Wizards feels derivative, right?
Mm,
Like, with Troll Hunter, we got a proper kind of story, right? Like, centered around Jim and his adventures. With Tree Below, with the Royal Twins, we got a proper story that interfaced with the Troll Hunter world, but not entirely. I
yep.
think, like, with Wizards being tied so closely to the Troll Hunter mythology,
Mm,
it didn't have room, perhaps, to kind of like flesh out some arc on its own.
mm,
So I don't know. Hopefully, we'll see what they do with the movie. But yeah,
yeah.
I mean, it was good. I enjoyed it.
Yep.
But still, in comparison to everything else that we've seen so far,
Yeah. I'm rating it a 6 out of 10.
yeah, same here, 6 for me.
All right. Next up, we're moving on to a little segment I like to call Quick Hits, where I quickly review some of the various films and TV shows that my co-host Isa probably hasn't seen, and some he has, so which he can chime in on later. Lah.
Yep.
The first thing I'd like to talk about is an indie film called She Dies Tomorrow.
Uh huh.
It is written and directed by Amy Seimetz. She Dies Tomorrow is probably the most singular and original film I've seen in 2020 so far.
Oh
Things
wow.
might change because there's a Charlie Kaufman movie coming out next week. But for now, this is the most original film I've seen. The film envisions a contagious mental illness where the afflicted believe that they will die by morning. So we start off with a woman named Amy on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She thinks she's going to die tomorrow. Amy can't prove it, but she's insistent. And when her friend Jane arrives, an intoxicated Amy strives to make the non-believer understand. And when she does, now Jane is also convinced that she'll die tomorrow. Jane flees to her brother's Jason's house, where he's throwing a birthday party for his wife. Now they also believe that they'll die tomorrow, and so on and so forth, like, as the infection spreads. Cymax's screenplay avoids the obvious tropes of the apocalyptic thriller, never once pausing for exposition or the standard survivor monologue to explain the threat at hand.
Hmm.
Instead, the ideological contagion quietly spreads as the various souls begin to fear for their own mortality. What begins as a psychodrama about one woman spreads into a dizzying narrative as we follow other infected people, people infected with the malady, through their bouts of unleashed passions, paranoia, mania, and soul searching. So it follows one character, spins off to another character, spins off to another character, and so on and so forth. So She Dies Tomorrow kind of combines this existential devastation with a gruesome body horror and David Lynchian surrealism to
Interesting.
paint disparate portraits of vulnerable people grappling with mortality.
Mm-hmm.
She Dies Tomorrow takes that inane advice that for you to live like there's no tomorrow, very literally, and then presents us with a series of characters who are unprepared for such a scenario. Some are no longer unburdened by social constructs. Some are unsure. Some are frightened. Some take the opportunity to finally do what they want. So She Dies Tomorrow ultimately becomes less of a linear survival story, and more of a scattershot look at mental disarray.
Yep.
Cymets collects the pieces into a mesmerizing audiovisual tapestry that includes a jittery electronic score by the Mondo Boys and dizzying neon, red and blue stroboscopic lighting, where
Mm-hmm.
whenever the characters become unhinged, the performances are universally terrific, ensuring that we're invested in each branch of the diverging story, and that we emotionally understand the plight of each character. The film is bizarre and fantastical, but there's also an emotionally precise feeling, despite the fact that it feels like a hallucinogenic trip. Uh, she Dies Tomorrow ponders self fulfillment with agency, and has a riveting execution with fearless creativity. This film was made pre COVID. Its release right now kind of coincidentally taps into the world's pandemic anxieties, making it even more relevant. So it's an 8 out of 10 for me.
Wow. Okay. Cool.
Yep.
Cool.
So this is highly recommended. Next up, we'll be talking about Doom Patrol. The first season of Doom Patrol was that rare season of television that felt like no idea in the writers' room was strange enough to get turned down. And I mean that as a compliment. It was so wild that even for that season, that Legends of Tomorrow felt tame by comparison. If only because Legends' abundance of creativity is somewhat hampered by its PG-13 rating, whereas Doom Patrol was free to go as explicit and as adult as it wanted lah. So the biggest worry going to season 2 is whether the show could capture that feeling of wild abandon with such razor sharp energy a second time. After all, how can you keep heading upwards when you started out with a interdimensional farting goat, introduced a sentient street who comes out as a gender queer, pivoted into a swarm of bloodthirsty butts, and ended up with a kaiju-sized rat and cockroach making out. Fear not, though, Doom Patrol remains as effortlessly oddball in its sophomore season,
Mm-hmm.
but also improves itself by leaning harder into the tragedy of it all at the same time. It's a show filled with outcasts who define themselves by the very things that make them outcasts in the first place. And because of its R21 rating, it can definitely delve into the character's pain and tragedy a lot more than Legends can. Lah. And,
Yep.
and its gags are free to be as explicit or sexual or violent as they want. Everyone is still pissed off at Niles, and rightfully so. The revelation that the Mad Doctor was the cause behind every team member's deformity has shattered the trust. So that is kind of the plot of the second season. Lah.
Uh-huh.
But the second season mostly focuses on Niles' daughter, Dorothy. Dorothy, who was freed during last season's finale, has been kept prisoner for over a century, mostly because the perpetual 11-year-old girl is too Omega level to be left out in the world. And at first, it seems that only Niles can control her. Meanwhile, each of our main characters has a personal raging issue inside them, with the ensemble cast remaining as across the board incredible as ever. Cliff is a robot powered by mostly unchecked rage that's exacerbated by the fact that his daughter has no idea he's alive. There's a kind of mutiny happening in the underground of Jane, as each of her 64 personalities make a case to become the primary personality.
Mm-hmm.
Both Cyborg and Rita Farr feel like they're battling for their own bodies, while Larry Traynor struggles to make peace with an abandoned family who has aged past him. If Doom Patrol Season 2 does have a flaw, is that there isn't much of a main story to focus on.
Okay.
The season is vaguely tied together by their drive to save Niles' daughter and Niles himself because of an ominous entity inside of Dorothy that threatens to destroy the world. And while the dilemma to either protect or destroy this 11-year-old girl is compelling, the entity inside her isn't nearly as entertaining as Alan Tudyk's Mr. Nobody. The individual arcs are good, but they kind of don't come together. They're like like a series of short stories, which kind of leads to an unsatisfying finale, I feel. Nevertheless, the show is still very inventive, laugh out loud funny, very emotional, and it dives deep into the hits of DC's most fucked up characters. The result is a character study that still manages to make time for stuff like a disco party between the fabric of time and the arrival of something called the Sex Men, which are a Ghostbusters group that hunts down sex demons that is unleashed when Flex Mantello uses his magical muscles to cause Rita to orgasm uncontrollably. That is that kind of show. Um yeah, it's a batshit banana show, and I love it. And that's kind of the beauty of Doom Patrol: its ability to transition from pure ridiculousness to relatable heartbreak so quickly that you don't even notice that you're going from laughing to tearing up. This was a solid second season, but a couple of steps down from season one, so it's a 7 out of 10 just because of the unsatisfying finale and
uh,
the kind of messy nature of it, lah.
yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Next up, I'm going to be talking about a film called Sputnik. It's a Russian independent film. It's the first feature from Egor Abramaneko. It takes a B movie conceit and injects it with a sizable budget and delivers a visceral extraterrestrial alien invasion story that is very attuned to the spirit of the alien movies, that it feels as if it's part of Ridley Scott's universe. The story itself takes place in the early 1980s and revolves around a cosmonaut who survives a mysterious accident and returns to Earth with a being inside of him, kind of like Venom. The creature leaves its host body at night to feed before retreating, leaving the Russian researchers baffled and uncertain whether to fear this new arrival or harness it as a weapon. It's kind of a fun creature feature, a midnight movie kind of experience that builds to a gory showdown while raising familiar questions about whether governmental forces might be even worse than the monster it's hunting.
Mm-hmm.
The real highlight of Sputnik, though, centers on the effort of a conflicted young doctor played by Oksana Akinsha, who, as she works to contain the alien threat, she is fantastic because she feels exactly like Ellen Ripley parachuting into Soviet-era Russia. I was so down for it. But as great of a alien homage as it is, I do have to acknowledge that it's a straight ripoff.
Oh.
And you can see all the beats coming. And because of that, it's a 6 out of 10,
Oh.
despite the fact that it's entertaining. But it is Russian alien,
Okay.
pretty much. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Next up, let's talk about to give myself a break. I know that Isa has watched this, so maybe Isa, you can give a review for Lucifer season 5, part 1.
Okay, so Lucifer to this day remains one of my guilty pleasures.
Yeah, such a guilty pleasure show.
It's such
Yeah.
a guilty pleasure, right? And like the my main conceit at the beginning when they announced Lucifer is that it was totally not what we wanted it to be. Which was we wanted an adaptation of Lucifer
The Sandman
from
universe.
the Sandman universe, right?
Yep.
So to get what we got eventually, which is just this like insane like criminal procedure thing where the devil helps you out, and just like tons of like hot people all over the place.
Yep.
Lucifer has kind of grown into its
Yeah.
own skin, right, and unabashedly so. And
Mm.
season 5 is just kind of more of the same, right? Like
Mm.
the premise itself allows for a level of like strange absurdity that um is kind of it's a weird thing to enjoy, but it works, right?
Yep.
Just because I think like it has garnered a fair bit of goodwill among its fans. So for season 5 again, we start off with Lucifer now back,
In hell.
now back in hell,
Yep.
right? And just kind of like the different life that he's been living there, and people back in LA and are back on Earth are kind of coping with his loss, especially Detective Deca and her little crummy bunch of
Mm.
humans back on Earth.
Mm.
Amenadieu is coping with finding out news that he's now a father, and trying to work those things out as well. So broadly, season 5 can be categorized into kind of um, two arcs, I guess, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
pretty much two arcs. So the first half of the series, we have a new antagonist in the form of is that a spoiler?
It happens early, lah, so
It
I guess you
happens.
can go
It
ahead.
happens
Yeah.
very early. So basically, someone pretends to be Lucifer while he is away in
Mm-hmm.
hell, and it turns out to be his twin brother Michael,
Yep.
right? And he's here to cause all sorts of shenanigans and kind of like pull Lucifer out of hell, right? Just because he feels like I Lucifer accolades are undeserved, which is a strange premise to kind of work off of.
Right.
But that sets up basically all the points of conflict more or less for the rest of the season.
Mm.
The introduction of this doppelganger into the lives of everybody else, and before he's discovered, um, brings up a lot of issues that have been latent in the series for the characters for a long time. Because Michael's power is to draw out the fears of people as
Yep.
opposed to the desires that Lucifer has, and
Yeah.
that actually allows for a fair bit of character development. That's
Mm-hmm.
pretty surprising. I
Mm.
think, in particular, Maze's story arc across this season was pretty fantastic.
Mm.
I feel that I wish that they had concluded that this season, but it's a fairly big arc,
Yep.
so it doesn't see much resolution here.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with kind of like the subplot with Amenadiel and Charlie, the new baby, who is supposedly special and
Mm-hmm.
all of that. So like all the fears that come with parenthood and being good enough and wanting the best for your child is also kind of explored here. Dan, Detective Dan is still dealing with the loss of Charlotte and is on
Mm.
kind of like a self-help binge that has some hilarious outcomes to that.
Yep.
So all in all, I think like it was pretty enjoyable overall. I do
Enjoyable.
feel
Yeah.
that the introduction of Michael felt more problematic than it needed to be. Like
Mm.
he's not a great antagonist
Mm.
by any measure. But then again, we've never really gotten great antagonists in
In
the
Lucifer.
Lucifer
Yeah.
series.
Yep.
Um, so for him to play foil in a kind of like half-hearted manner just didn't quite gel for me.
Mm.
I do think that there was a lot of missed opportunities this
Yep.
season is my main complaint. I think that the
Yeah.
whole idea of drawing out people's fears was so promising at the beginning, but
Mm.
eventually the way that they dealt with those things felt so so disappointing, right? Because
Mm.
like there could have been so much good work that they could have done there.
Yep.
Ultimately, however, I think like you just go through another season of Lucifer. As enjoyable as it is incredibly frustrating as well, right? Because
Mm.
everybody just keeps lapsing back into their old habits. It's a hell loop on its own, and as
Yeah.
entertaining as it is,
Mm.
we get dragged back into another one,
Yeah.
to go into another cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Um,
Character arcs just feel like they're running in place.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's kind of sad. I
Yeah.
think like again, we have no this we're not pretending that Lucifer is an amazing series all
Mm.
around. I just feel that it could be so much more than what we are currently getting.
Agreed. How would you rate season 5?
Season 5 was kind of middling for me. I don't think it was as exciting, I think,
Yeah.
as maybe season season 3, I think, was kind of peak for me
Correct.
for
Yes.
that. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna give it a 6, right? Like it's enjoyable, it's kind of fun. The first half is okay. Second half is a
Mm-hmm.
bit better. But if you're a fan and you've enjoyed Lucifer so far, it really is more of the same. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much of more of the same I can take, despite the fact that it's been a guilty pleasure.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I feel the same way as well. And I rate it similarly as well. Next up, we're moving on to the New Mutants. Shot in 2017. It's subjected to a lengthy post-production period that included plans for reshoots, the sale of 20th Century Fox to Disney, several postponed release dates, including one this past April due to the coronavirus pandemic.
Hmm.
The long delayed New Mutants is finally out. And if you're a long time listener, you recall that way back in the December of 2017, on our first episode, I declared that New Mutants was my most anticipated release of 2018. Uh, Over 2 years later, 2.5 years later, two and three quarters year, almost 3 years later, right? And no less than eight different postponed release dates that have been announced and then cancelled and announced and cancelled. I finally got to see it, and boy, was I disappointed. This horror take on the X-Men franchise held such promise, particularly because it was based on Bill Sienkiewicz's famous and legitimately frightening the Demon Bear saga
Yep.
in the New Mutants comics in the 1980s. In fact, it's still one of my favorite comic book runs of all time. Sadly, Josh Boone's adaptation is a pale imitation.
Uh,
This asylum set psychological thriller could have been great if perhaps Josh Boone had gotten his wish for an R-rated cut, or perhaps it wasn't his fault entirely. Who knows? After all, there's so many cooks in the kitchen with all the studio reshuffles. There's no less than 8 credited writers that have written and rewritten the script. As it is now under the Disney overlords, this PG movie isn't scary at all. It kind of dilutes the trauma and the fear that these characters are dealing with.
Yep.
The premise that the worst fears of these young mutants manifesting, they've all suffered some sort of abuse, is great. But when the portrayal is this mild, is disappointing lah. At best, Blue Hunt, who plays Danny Moonstar, Anya Taylor-Joy, who plays Ileana Rasputin, and Maisie Williams, who plays Rani Sinclair, all give terrific performances. But this overall feels like one of the lower tier episodes of Buffy,
Oh man.
which is hilarious because the characters, right, are shown multiple times in the movie watching Buffy. It's but like clips of Buffy episodes are shown on screen right before the movie rips off what that Buffy episode did. A bit of a nod of the head or a direct rip-off, I would say,
uh,
of those Buffy clips, and the movie replicates the exact same beats from the show. So it's kind of a generic horror derivative storytelling, and the teen angst on display here is very disappointing. It's a 4 out of 10 for me.
oh man. Okay, that's
All right.
that's sad.
Next up, let's talk about a new Netflix film called Project Power.
Yep.
It is set in New Orleans. Project Power is about the spread of a mysterious new pill that unlocks superpowers unique to each user. The catch is you don't know what will happen until you take it. While some develop things like bulletproof skin, invisibility, super strength, others develop things that are more lethal, or you may even die from it. But when the pill escalates crime within the city to dangerous levels,
Yep.
a local cop, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, teams with a teenage dealer and former soldier fueled by a secret vendetta, Jamie Foxx, to fight power with power and risk taking the pill in order to track down and stop the group responsible for creating it. So Project Power is a hard R action flick set in the streets. It is trying so hard to be the gritty image comic come to life. That the film kind of pummels the viewer with an overwhelming blend of hip hop musical cues and graffiti covered walls and in your face camera work. Trying to convince the viewers that this is a movie that hums with the energy of the streets. So what do you think about Project Power?
Meh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Basically, that's it. I mean, it's very flashy. Don't get
mm,
me wrong. It's really, really flashy. I think the CGI was pretty solid overall.
yep,
But it's just that, right? Like, it feels like a movie that was written by committee. It really does.
yeah,
Like, it checks every box that you would need to get like feedback from a
mm-hmm,
from a group. The story is weak. The
mm-hmm,
characters are weak. I mean, like I think the most fleshed out character is Robin, right? Is Dominic Fishback,
yep,
who plays Robin, and I think she does a pretty good job at that. But like, uh, Jamie Foxx and Joseph Gordon-Levitt are just phoning it in.
yeah,
It's nothing that we've not seen from them, and I mean, understandably so. The characters don't have any sort of depth to them to begin with. Like, there could be so much more i- in the time that we're living in, right? Like, with questions about the police and with law and with like unrest and all of those things.
mm,
Uh, like, this could have been pretty zeitgeist, if they
mm,
had spent the time to examine the issues that surround the pill, right? Like, the pill itself is not what the movie should be about, but ultimately that is what I mean. Like, they brush over all sorts of issues, right? Like, should law
mm,
enforcement agents be allowed, right, to use this pill? Do we fight power with power? Like, who is it that ultimately suffers when something like this is released? And then we got this huge evil corporation. There's so many
mm,
things here that are just thrown into the mix without much thought,
yep,
and it's incredibly messy and not very well told, and like it's meh is my
yeah.
yeah.
4 out of 10 for me. What about you?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 10 as well. Like, if it's just something that you wanna not bother thinking and watch it, sure, but like, I don't think it's worth your time.
Yeah, same. Finally, for quick hits, I'll be talking about Star Trek Lower Decks.
Mm.
Mike Mahan, who is the writer of Rick and Morty and Solar Opposites, he has a new animated comedy called Star Trek Lower Decks, as a spin-off of Star Trek, as you can guess. The show follows the support crew of one of Starfleet's least important ships, the USS Cerritos, a ship specializing in second contact, which means that they visit new planets after the A team has already done the more prestigious work. Their jobs are routine and bureaucratic. They usually involve paperwork. The lead characters are young goofballs who are funny and relatable, but far from the paragons of bravery and diplomacy and heroism that Star
Mm-hmm.
Trek is known for. It's also radically non-serialized, with each episode representing its own comic adventure for our bumbling protagonist. It's a fun and breezy show and has a ton of amazing deep cut Star Trek in jokes for longtime fans. But it may be a bit too fun and breezy to the point where I can't get emotionally invested in any of the characters, and the situations they're put in have no stakes. So why should I care? I guess there is something admirable about how fiercely committed Lower Decks is to being low stakes entertainment,
Yeah.
which is difficult to achieve for a Star Trek show since it's an inherently philosophical and anthropological franchise about how politics, religion, and culture can either unite or divide us. But the problem is not really is that it's not interested in anything. It's like a throwback to old sitcoms with no character developments and
Uh-huh.
very simple gags. It's not entirely bad. At best, it's an amusing and zany show. But unlike other much better Trek parodies like Galaxy Quest or the Orville, the official Trek parody has little regard for the ethos of Star Trek and what it stands for, which is why it's a mix for me. Like it's a 5 out of 10.
Ah, okay. Yeah. All right. All right. No,
Yeah. Next up, we're jumping into Isa's corner now. It's called Isa's anime corner.
yeah.
But I'll be starting it off with the new season of Aggretsuko.
Mm-hmm.
So Aggretsuko season 3. To me, Aggretsuko the anime has been one of the most cathartic television watches since it debuted in 2018. A Netflix original series from Sanrio. The series follows office worker slash red panda Retsuko as she lives her life as a mild-mannered woman who has to deal with the pressures of a toxic workplace, romance, domineering mom, and pretty much any other existential millennial problem women in their mid 20s to early 30s face. To deal with the anxiety and pressure, Retsuko finds refuge in a karaoke room and screams death metal. Uh, while last season was relatable to a scary degree, directly tackling interpersonal toxicity in the workplace and what to do when the person you love isn't looking for the same future, Aggretsuko Season 3 manages to offer up a more whimsical narrative that still hits home in terms of representing everyday problems. Aggretsuko Season 3 shows audiences a Retsuko who is dealing with the emotional fallout of last season. Having broken up with Tadano, she loses herself in a virtual video game, a virtual dream, with a dream boyfriend. It's one of those boyfriend video games or girlfriend video games, But also the world of microtransactions, because, she's forced to buy clothes for the boyfriend, buy food for dates for this virtual boyfriend. It throws her finances into chaos,
Uh-huh.
and soon long nights in the video game begins to take their toll on Retsuko's work life. That is until her focus shifts into a new venture. So the bulk of Retsuko Season 3 focuses on Retsuko as her life becomes intertwined with a J-pop idol band called the OTM Girls. That is comprised of Hidarin, Manaka, Migi, and their manager Hyodo. So what happens is Retsuko gets into a car accident with Hyodo because she's so sleep deprived. So Retsuko's debt skyrockets. She's out of money now.
Yeah.
So Retsuko joins the idol group that he's managing as the accounting director. But to her surprise, like the group isn't doing very well. So she takes on the task of pushing them towards success. At first it takes at first it feels like a fool's errand. She's constantly exhausted working two jobs and exasperated. But slowly she starts to find fulfillment in the job when the OTM girls finally start to make a profit and start to get a bit bigger.
Yeah.
And then she starts to break out of her own shell when. Due to circumstances, she's forced to take over as the lead singer for the group, turning it into a screamo baby metal kind of band. But from there, new problems surface, like particularly with regards to how seriously the grounded and reserved Retsuko is willing to take this new career.
yeah.
And then towards the end of the season, the show kind of tackles toxic fandom when a fan begins stalking and harassing Retsuko, and it's kind of the most scarier things that Aggretsuko has kind of dealt with, because it kind of puts our lead character in very real danger. And
Oh.
and while Retsuko is having her own story, Haida and Feneko do what they can to find out what the red panda is hiding from them, because she's obviously hiding her depths, but
Yep.
she's also obviously hiding her idol career, keeping it a secret. That's not all. Haida, the hyena, is still pining over Retsuko for the last few seasons, and it all comes to a hit here. Even as another girl in the office takes an interest in Haida, forcing him to choose between someone who is unattainable versus giving this awesome new girl a shot. We also get to spend more time with Haida, lah, but we also spend more time with Retsuko's other friends like Gori the gorilla, who has her own side hustle by building a new dating app that's set to revolutionize Japanese marriages.
Mm-hmm.
So season 3 does a good job of not only showcasing new facets of Retsuko's personality, but also adding more depth to other characters in the story. This show is very amazing. I love it. It's an anthropomorphic animal. The anthropomorphic animal character designs right fit the personalities of the characters,
Yeah.
while cleverly subverting them at the same time. Additionally, there's just so many still images that are sure to become memes, because not only are they fun to look at, but their entire moods.
Yeah.
While the problems in Red Skull's life have changed slightly, the series remains the most relatable thing that I watch on Netflix. So it's an 8 out of 10 for me. Yeah. So what about you, man? Or what are the anime things that you've been watching this
Uh,
season?
okay, so uh, there's a dearth of new anime that I'm gonna recommend.
Yep.
But I am gonna go through like a lot of returning series that I think if people aren't aware have the we I highly rated their first or second seasons, and now that they're back, I just want to kind
Mm,
of talk about that. So I think the biggest thing that people were kind of looking forward to was the second season of ReZero.
yeah.
For people unfamiliar, basically ReZero takes place in an isekai in a different world where our main protagonist Subaru dies a lot,
Mm-hmm.
a lot, and he suffers a lot before he dies. And in season one, he finally managed to kind of wrap up the entire story, but not without sacrificing a great deal of things. And season two just promises to be much of the same. ReZero was wildly popular when it first came out, just because like people it's been a while since people had gotten that much suffering for a main protagonist.
Mm,
And The kind of punishment that he goes through and how he just kind of continually picks himself up is very very painful to watch. Right, it's almost masochistic in the way that it is framed, and I think that resonated with a fair amount of people, so much so that it became extremely popular.
right.
So now they had just wrapped up a kind of a retelling of the first season with additional scenes and things like that. And now season two is finally out, and I'm here to tell you that it is more of the same kind of punishment.
Mm,
And it's still really really good. The
mm,
stakes now are very very different from the beginning, because when Subaru is first introduced to the world, or when we are first introduced to the world that he is in, we don't really have an idea of what's going on. But now that he's kind of a bit more familiar with the characters in his world, and like the way that the world works and what the rules are about, as far as dying and reincarnation and repeating the story over and over again. The stakes have gone up, right? And now Rem is missing, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, because there are a fair few interesting things that happen, a couple of twists and turns that you don't really expect. But yeah, ReZero is everything that the first season was and a lot more. And I think if you enjoyed the first one, you can you most certainly enjoy where this is going right now. I
yeah.
believe it's currently more than midway through the season, so there's a fair bit to binge if you would like to. Although I will say that it's kind of hard to binge through 8 episodes at one go, just because of how painful it is
Yep.
sometimes. So yeah, ReZero season two. Please go check that out. Please go check out the first season if you haven't seen it.
Mm-hmm.
It is an interesting take on the isekai genre. There is a lot of dying. There's a fair bit of gore. It's pretty well done though, I have to say, and it's one of the more like creepy scores musically that we've gotten in a while. So please go ahead and check that out.
Definitely. Nice.
I'm gonna talk about the return of Fire Force,
Fire
season
Force,
two.
yeah. Netflix, right?
Yeah, so right now it's been added on Netflix, and I mean, like the guys who program the anime stuff at Netflix, big kudos to them. I think like for any kind of old title that I've already watched that I love, it's probably already on Netflix unless it's really really obscure. A lot of
Mm.
fan favorites are on there as well, and like Fire Force in its first season was a great show. The animation is great, the music is great, the character development is kind of reminiscent of a lot of shonen anime, but it has its own kind of twist to it. For
Yep.
people who have enjoyed, well, not Naruto per se, but it's a kind of fresh take on how shonen animes go, right? It's a bit more faster paced. There aren't any filler episodes. The world building is fascinating, and the animation style is pretty breathtaking at times. The fight scenes are some of
Mm.
the best I've seen in recent years. I would say that very honestly, its first season was overshadowed by Demon Slayer,
Right. Yeah. Last
and
year, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
last year, right? But it is up there with some of the best anime that's come out in recent years.
Mm.
So we followed our firefighters as well as they continue to delve into the mysteries of their world and who is actually behind all the combustions and accidents and the way that their world works at the moment. And some pretty interesting finds, some pretty world-shaking finds, if I may say so.
Mm.
Again, it's more than midway through. I think it's like on episode 8 or 9 right now. Netflix is slightly behind, I think, by 2 episodes.
Okay.
But yeah, great stuff. I really really like the show, and honestly, like right now with Demon Slayer being on hiatus until the next season, this might be the best anime out at the moment.
Yeah. Nice.
Nice. I'm also going to talk about the second season of the new Sword Art Online Alicization War of the Underworld.
Oh wow.
So basically, this is the kind of uh, the naming convention is very problematic, right?
Yeah.
Co-
Yeah. I have trouble keeping up.
Yeah. So Alicization is actually season 3,
I see. Okay.
but there's so much to adapt from this particular arc that it has split into multiple seasons of its own,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there was a Sword Art Online Alicization, which was Sword Art Online Season 3, that went into Sword Art Online War of the Underworlds Season 1, which I
Yep.
talked about as well. And now we're into Season 2, and we are like neck deep, right, into the story right now. Like, you're not going to be able to jump into this at any point in time. I feel like uh, Sword Art Online has been one of those franchises that if you haven't quite followed from the beginning, you're going to get lost.
Yeah.
But for fans of the series who were very disappointed with how season 2 kind of turned out with all the arcs that were there, Gun Gale Online was okay.
Yeah.
Um, but like it kind of was a slump, right? I think with Alicization, both with the movie and with the first season of with season 3, they kind of really really picked up the pace, and it was very reminiscent of the first episode because they bring a lot of fresh ideas and kind of like thematically philosophical things to the table about like
Mhm.
what is the nature of being, can AIs have a soul, and so on and so forth. Like all of these things are tackled in very kind of gritty, like very real gritty ways. Going into War of the Underworld season 2, all of our favorite characters are now included in the story. Whereas at first it was just basically Kirito, as always.
Yep.
But now everything has come to a fall. We are reaching kind of like the climax of this particular arc as well. The battle scenes go from like really detailed, dynamic, small fights with our main group to like these massive all full scale wars that are like kind of stunning to kind of watch. And it's a whole flurry of things that if you've been a fan of Sword of Online and you've been catching up with what they've been doing, like continues to be very very good and very very promising. They have slumped off a bit on the kind of more heady ideas that they had in season 1,
Yep.
but that doesn't take away from the sheer enjoyment because now after kind of like contemplating all those things, you're seeing the consequence of that and how they play out, and it's very satisfying.
Nice. Okay.
Uh,
Any other recommendations from the world of anime?
yeah. So just two more. My teen romantic comedy Snafu Climax, which is the second season, which we
Third,
will
actually,
kind of
right?
third season, sorry, and which we will
Yeah.
dive into
Yeah.
on our next
On
episode
an.
of The Whole. So I'm not gonna
Yep.
say much about
Mm-hmm.
that. Hits is a big fan now, which is
Yes.
great.
Completely caught up with it.
Yeah, so I think by the time we will the season will almost be done. I think by the time we record Behold. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll talk a bit more about that there. But not to say one of my favorite slice of life comedy anime of all time. Right? It's so
Yes.
good. It's very special. Don't be thrown off by the strange name or the very long name. Like it really
Mm-hmm.
has some of the best things that the best comedy that anime has to offer. Right?
Yeah,
And so
definitely.
that's been going on slightly more than halfway through the season as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm gonna wrap up with the only new anime
Oh wow. Okay.
recommendation that I have for this season, and it's called Decadence.
Mm-hmm.
So stylized as Deca-Dence. We are introduced to a post-apocalyptic world where humanity is driven to the brink of extinction by the sudden emergence of an unknown insectoid life form called Gadol.
Okay.
These humans have survived in a mobile fortress that's like 3 kilometers high, called Decadence, which is built to protect them from the Gadol threat. The denizens of this mobile fortress fall into two main categories. You have gears, who are warriors who fight the Gadol on a daily basis, and the tankers, who are basically your working class who keep the mobile fortress running, and they clean the place, they make sure everything is fueled up, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
We follow the story of Natsume, who is a tanker girl who dreams of becoming a gear one day. And through just living her life and going through the process of growing up in Decadence, she meets Kaburagi, who is an armor repairman uh, and who has a secret past as well as a ongoing secret as well. So the chance meeting of the two ends up in some pretty interesting adventures, and there's a huge kind of twist that happens fairly early on,
Oh
but
wow.
it's
Okay.
kind of mind blowing at the same time because it changes the entire story.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm not gonna spoil, but to say that it took me, I was completely caught off guard by that. Like there were hints of it and a bit of foreshadowing that I didn't pick up on very early on. But the twist midway through the season turns the entire story on its head and gives it a totally different meaning.
Yep.
And like kind of mind blowing. I'm gonna call it now, and I'm gonna say that Decadence is going to get picked up by Netflix pretty much as soon as it's done. I think that what I've seen so far is set it out to be pretty interesting. It's got some very dynamic combat, given that I won't go into like the pseudoscience of it, but basically like it's aerial combat, right? Like it is Starship Troopers but aerial combat. So it's
Oh
Starship
wow.
Troopers meets like Attack on Titan. It's what it feels like, right? And it's
Yep.
it the fight scenes are pretty fucking amazing, I have to say.
Nice.
So my one and only recommend new anime recommendation from this season,
Yep.
hopefully we are getting, I mean like things are kind of coming back online as far as anime studios go. So they're as disappointing as this summer season has been, fall seems to have quite a few fan favorites coming back and a few big titles coming up. So
Mm-hmm.
let's look forward to that in the months to come.
Awesome. Yes. Yeah. A lot of the big titles are coming up October onwards.
Yep.
So we're excited for that. I think a lot of the summer shows that have been pushed to fall, and plus all the regular fall shows,
Yeah.
will make it a very exciting anime season next up, lah.
Yep.
And yeah, we're gonna end off with what we like to call genre equality issues, where we talk about the issues plaguing the genre world, lah. Firstly, I would like to kick it off with what's happening over at DC Comics right now. Shockingly, there have been massive layoffs that has gutted DC Comics completely. The merger between AT&T and Time Warner, into yet another monolithic media mega corporation, has seen a massive wave of firings targeted primarily at Warner Brothers. One area hit hardest was DC Entertainment,
Yep.
with reports of huge swaths of staff at both DC Comics and DC Universe being laid off. What is that a shocking one third of DC Comics' editorial staff
Damn.
were part of the roughly 600 layoffs over at Warner Media, including editors like Brian Cunningham, Mark Doyle, and Andy Curry. The latter of which actually formed a major part of DC's rebranding and reorganization of its comic output.
Yep.
He created the Black Label line a few years ago. Senior members of DC's editorial operations were not spared either. The senior VP of Publishing Strategy and Support Services, VP of Marketing, VP of Creative Services, and a whole lot more. Like there's just too many people to this. It's a bloodbath over there, man.
Yeah.
Uh, Editor in chief Bob Harris, who has actually faced scrutiny for years for his alleged protection of employees, like sexual harasser Eddie Berganza and Scott Lobdell, was another major departure. Although I feel like he would have been fired anyways. However, Jim Lee, who is DC's chief commercial officer, CCO, remains in place. And reports that AT&T, for reasons inexplicably known, is looking to bring in a new general manager above Jim Lee, above the editorial in chief.
Really?
Yeah, and they're hiring from the world of esports
Huh. What?
to be the senior editor, which I don't quite understand. Yeah, I don't understand at all. Other areas that were hit by the layoffs, DC Collectibles, the merchandising arm of DC that creates action figures, statues, and other collector memorabilia,
Uh-huh.
they have been shut down as well, cut entirely. DC Universe, the streaming service that premiered Doom Patrol, Swamp Thing, Harley Quinn, Titans, has been completely erased. All their shows will be moving to HBO Max. This one is okay. Like, I mean, I totally understand this.
Yeah.
Why have two different streaming services when you can just simplify it and bring them all into one thing lah.
Hmm.
The only problem with that is that DC Universe wasn't solely creating uh TV or film content. DC Universe was also supposed to be the backlog of DC archives.
Yeah.
You pay a certain monthly fee, you can read everything from DC's archives lah.
Yeah.
So the HBO Max doesn't have anything like that. So there is no more DC online service to basically stream comics lah. So and just in terms of the publishing
Uh-huh.
arm of DC, terrible. Like, I have no idea what's going to go forward. I don't know whether this is. I mean, DC has always been considered one of the big two, lah.
Yeah.
Marvel and DC. I don't know whether DC will be part of the big two anymore, because it seems like other companies like Image and Boom Studios right now seem to be more popular and bigger than DC is. So yeah, I'm very very worried about the future of DC Comics.
Yeah. I think with the news broke, like it's what are we gonna get out of DC now? Like with everything that's going on, we got the Snyder cut, right? That's about it. That's not.
Oh, we have
I'm.
the Batman and Wonder Woman 84 and things like that.
Yeah. So all of those are still on track, right?
Yeah, yeah, but those are like films which are
Yeah.
based on the comics, which I don't know whether will exist in a coming few years.
Yeah, so I mean, like, I hope they figure it out or they get something together, because like it's I think it's dire enough that we might lose a lot of like fan favorite kind of franchises, or even a lot of legacy stuff that we've come
Mm.
to love over the years.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's tough, like, and also it makes me think that like DC will take less risks, going forward. Like, they won't be having any kind of Vertigo-esque titles. They're probably going to be leaning to a lot of the mainstream ones to make their corporate overlords happy, like
Yeah.
making them money, higher profit, and things like that. So it's worrying for the state of publishing.
Yeah.
Marvel has its own issues, but at the very least, Marvel still owns Marvel Studios, which is making them a shit ton of money.
Hmm.
They're not laying off anybody at the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, we'll see what happens with DC in the months and years to come, lah. But it doesn't look good, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Kind of moving on from that
Yeah.
as well. So I just want to talk really quickly about the demise of Kiss Anime and Kiss Manga, two of the biggest portals, I think, for anime and manga in the last couple of years. So this month, both sites officially announced that they were closing down permanently, and largely in part to lawsuit legal action being taken by Japanese the Japanese government and all of the creators.
Mm.
So for those of you that don't know, the Japanese government on I think the 5th of June, right, passed two new amendments to existing copyright laws to tackle the growing issue of piracy of anime and manga,
Mm-hmm.
along with magazines and academic texts, but that doesn't affect genre as much.
At
So
all,
the
yeah.
yeah, so the existing copyright laws have always covered their stuff like music and movies and anime, but the new laws have brought in like stiffer punishments, looking to deal with the digitalization of print media, and
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth. So leech websites, for example, such as Kiss Anime and Kiss Manga, who for the longest time have been able to operate underneath a loophole whereby they aren't hosting the actual content itself, but only posting the links to it.
Yep.
Uh, they've gotten away with it for years and years on end, right? But the new law makes it illegal to even operate. Or even post download links on message boards, with penalties
Hmm.
going up to like 5 years jail time, or even I think it's like 5 million yen, a fine of 5
Wow.
million yen, or both, right? And the law at first only covered websites run by people inside Japan.
Okay.
But right now, it's expanding to others as well, right? So the second part of the law, mainly about manga itself, right? So 2 years jail time, 2 million yen, and that kind of thing. So there are still plenty of leech websites that are out, but I don't think any of them reach kind of like the scale that Kiss Anime or Kiss Manga were operating on in that
Mm.
time. So we are moving into a very kind of different uh, world as far as manga and anime goes. Just with less access or less free access, I think.
Yep.
A lot of people, there's been a lot of debate about whether or not the death of these kind of websites is more detrimental or more beneficial to the industry as a whole. I
Hmm.
mean, like, piracy is definitely a concern when the money isn't being put in the hands of the people who are making the content itself.
Yep.
And there have in the last couple of years, like, there has been a lot of other platforms such as Funimation and Crunchyroll who have stepped in to fill that kind of gap, right? I think Crunchyroll right now has one of the biggest databases as a paid streaming service for anime.
Hmm.
um and of course Netflix himself also has been growing its own catalog. So just kind of to pick your brain hits, like, about does this change very much how people are going to be able to consume and watch anime? Does it actually cause the overall reach of the medium to be less than before when it's shut behind paywalls?
I think first of all, Japan's crackdown on anime manga and anime piracy is not going to have much an effect on piracy. Actually, I
Yeah.
think
Mm-hmm.
because there are hundreds of alternative sites out there.
Yeah.
Your nine enemies and etc. Are still going to be up and about. The enforcement of fining and the enforcement of this new law for people who live outside of Japan is next to impossible.
Yep.
So there's nothing that can be done about that lah. So don't actually think it will take a temporary hit right now in terms of exposure because Kiss Anime is so huge and Kiss Manga is so big.
Yep.
But the people who illegally download and illegally stream are just going to switch over to torrents or switch to other streaming sites,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the issue of back in the day when when Metallica thought that they closed down Napster, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, nothing is going to change, like, in my opinion,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
kind of brings me to my follow-up point, right?
Yep.
Like, we were discussing this some time ago, especially when we were going through all the, like, the kind of the manhwa I was recommending, like,
Hmm.
um solo leveling and so on. A
Hmm.
lot of content creators are going straight to the consumer right now, right? And I think we see that a lot with manhwa, both Chinese and Korean,
Yep.
and webtoons going straight to consumer itself, and these creators basically getting their support directly from the consumer via
Yes.
Patreon, via donations, and all of that. But essentially, the content that they're making is free, and then
Yeah.
sponsors come in, and advertisers come in, and so on and so forth. Much like how things are done on YouTube. Do you
Yeah.
feel that um, in Japan, like, the manga industry is behind on a trend like that, where these smaller time creators who don't have their own big publishers like Tencent or so on and so forth, right,
Hmm.
have found spaces for themselves to be financially sustainable?
Yeah, a little bit lah. Japan's entertainment industry is I think kind of still bogged down by tradition, and they haven't really adapted in the way that other industries have adapted,
Yeah.
entertainment industries that is. So yeah, it'll be a detriment for now, but I think they will adapt eventually. Because look at Shonen Jump,
Yeah.
and things like that. They will end up offering if not free, cheap alternatives for them, even if it is behind a paywall.
Yeah.
Because as far as I know, Shonen Jump is insanely affordable. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's just like it's less than $1. You know, and you have like this huge back catalog and new monthly issues, and even the free version of Shonen Jump still you can get a lot from there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think Japan right now will slowly transition into online distribution,
Yeah.
more so than before, and find ways to legitimize it. But at the same time, the piracy issue isn't going away, much in the same way that the piracy issue isn't going away for Western things or
Mm-hmm.
with anything going on in the world.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll kind of see where how I mean how these things pan out. I mean, definitely the closing down of Kiss Anime and Kiss Manga is big news, and then we just want to
Big.
cover it and kind of the issues surrounding that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's been no secret that the anime industry in particular has been struggling for a while now.
Yep.
And especially with the pandemic that's going on, a lot of projects have been put on hold. But generally, there
Mm-hmm.
hasn't been as much money going into the industry as the
Mm-hmm.
amount of money that's being spent on it right now. Like, there's a huge demand for content in that area worldwide, but a lot of it isn't actually a lot of it of the money that is being made from there isn't getting back to the studios, or isn't even getting to the people who are actually drawing the stuff, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And with a couple of documentaries coming out and a lot of interviews coming out about how poorly paid a lot of the animators are right
Mm.
now. So it will be interesting to see if we move away from that to more independent animators coming up with their own stuff, and whether or not they can match the kind of quality that we see from like major studios like Kyoto Animation and
Mm-hmm.
Production IG and so on and so forth. Because it is looking like the system is at a critical point right now where either they
Mm-hmm.
evolve and become more sustainable for everyone involved,
Mm-hmm.
um, or people are just going to go their own way and find other ways to express themselves, but and be financially sustainable at the same time.
I feel it's happening in Western comics already. A lot of creators, the big ones at least, have
Yeah.
been moving to creator-owned companies
Yeah.
where they get at least a 50% share of everything,
Yeah.
uh, or they're moving on to just independently producing their own books and releasing it via the several creators right now with Kickstarters.
Yep.
You pay me money. I can publish this for you, then I send it out to you. It might move towards either creator owned or having more creator owned freedoms,
Hmm.
or if they don't do that, because the mainstream system is failing at the moment, the mainstream system isn't adapting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's you're right. Like, that's the way they're going to go. Like, they're going to go online, direct to consumer, or at least go to a company that gives them creator owned freedoms and creator owned equity.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I think, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we're due for a shakeup in the anime industry. So,
yeah.
but we'll see.
Yeah, definitely, man. And that wraps it up for Genre Equality 33. We will be back next month. We have a significantly smaller number of things to talk about next month. It's probably going to be an hour-long show. But we will be talking about the third entry into the Bill and Ted franchise, Bill and Ted Face the Music.
Yep.
We'll be talking about Mulan, which is actually being released in Singapore theaters, but in America and in North America at least, it will be released on Disney Plus. Finally, Janelle Monáe's horror film Antebellum is going
Hmm.
to be released. No idea what the plot is. Don't want to know until I watch it. I like the mystery of it. We'll be talking about in quick hits the new season of The Boys. I'll be talking about Jurassic World Camp Cretaceous, which is apparently a young, basically for aimed at kids 5 to 8. An animated show. There's a new film called The Secret Garden based on a famous book. A new series called Utopia. There's a zombie film called Alive from Korea that's premiering on Netflix. I'm going to be talking about Dragon's Dogma, which is the animation series based on the tabletop game,
Yep.
and a new hard sci-fi show about astronauts going to Mars called Away, starring Hilary Swank. So we'll be talking about all that, and plus I'll be delving into my recent obsession with Haikyuu, because Haikyuu is back next month in October. Haikyuu is back
Yep.
finally. I've caught up with all 4 seasons on Netflix, and I'm going to tell you what I think. TL didn't listen. It's very good. Uh, and for the poll list, I'll be talking about an old title called Bitch Planet. Lah. But all in all, it's a lot lesser than what we're talking about uh, this month. And I've almost forgot about a Ridley Scott show called Raised by Wolves,
Mm.
which looks fascinating. But the thing is, I don't know whether Raised by Wolves is going to be a binging thing, whether they're going to release all episodes in
Yeah.
September, or whether it's going to be monthly.
Yeah.
So if it's monthly, weekly. So if it's weekly, we'll probably cover it 3 episodes from now.
Yep.
If
When it's
it's
done.
a binge thing, yeah, then I'll talk about it next month lah.
Okay.
And also there's a title that is popping up on an American streaming service called Peacock, which is called Knots and Crosses, although it's already premiered on the BBC earlier this year.
Mm-hmm.
It posits an alternate universe, alternate history, whereby 700 years ago, Africa colonized Europe, and what it would look like today in present day London. Very interesting show that kind of flips racial power structures on its head. Very cool. Yeah, so that's up next month. Is there anything else that I missed that you would like to add?
No, I don't think so. Actually, there's this new anime that's on Netflix, like a Netflix original that's a Western thing,
Okay,
The
okay.
Great Pretender. So I haven't caught it
Oh,
yet. I might check it out and then we'll just chuck it in as like a quick review. It looks pretty good, I have to say. Like I was pretty taken by the trailer, so I'll probably dive into that as well.
nice. Okay, so you can look out for the Great Pretender then as well. Till then, this has been Hit There.
This is Isa.
Goodbye, guys. Have a good one.
Ciao.